What's the world coming to? A Conservative government that cuts taxes, stimulates the economy and encourages businesses to grow? A government that says yes to fracking so we can be less impacted by the global cost of energy? A government that's using the tax system to incentivise home ownership, particularly for first-time buyers? A government which reverses an increase in national insurance, which is a tax on jobs, and one which cuts a planned rise in corporation tax, which is a tax on investments. A government which ends caps on bonus payments for high flyers so that successful people are encouraged to come to the UK, stay here and pay their taxes in Britain. For the first time in decades, we've actually got a Conservative government. Be still, my beating heart. Let's be clear, this budget is one hell of a gamble. We're effectively borrowing billions to bring down inflation, which will be the consequence of support for energy bills. And we're borrowing more billions to reduce the tax burden on hard-working Brits and businesses. The Institute for Fiscal Studies are deeply uncomfortable with this policy, and their chief, Paul Johnson, has said the following. He said today the Chancellor announced the biggest package of tax cuts in 50 years, without even a semblance of an effort to make the public finance numbers add up. Instead, the plan seems to be to borrow large sums at increasingly expensive rates, put government debt on an unsustainable rising path, and hope that we get better growth. This marks such a dramatic change in the direction of economic policy making that some of the longer-serving cabinet ministers might be worried about getting whiplash. Ouch. And I'll be honest, the markets and international speculators are not loving this budget. However, we've learnt a bit, haven't we, about experts over the last couple of years. As with the junk modelling that we saw during the pandemic and the disastrous policies of lockdown as recommended by mainstream scientific experts, so mainstream financial experts have also had a recent habit of being wrong. It was financial experts who predicted Armageddon after Brexit. Remember that? They spoke of a run on the pound, a recession, a flight of capital, sky-high interest rates, a brain drain and a housing market crash. Didn't happen. And the Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, seriously underestimated the threat of inflation almost 2 years ago. He could have raised rates early to get on top of prices, but he failed to act. Experts, eh? And now the doom and gloom financial experts think that this government's dash for growth is a race to the bottom. So Liz Truss and her impressive new Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng have shown today enormous political and economic courage. The message is that they believe in Britain. They believe in our businesses and they believe in our incredible people, the millions who go out to work every day and contribute to the unstoppable juggernaut that is the British economy. The mainstream experts squeal about the extra borrowing. But what are we talking about here? 40 or 50 billion quid to put a tiger in the tank and fire up the engines of the British economy, to create economic growth with which to pay for the public services upon which we all rely. Where were these financial experts when we were borrowing £500 billion in what is now becoming clear was a failed attempt to stop a seasonal respiratory virus? £500 billion to pay healthy people to stay at home and to close once viable businesses for a potentially nasty virus, yes, but one with a largely vanishing threat to human life. One of the top medics in the world, the highly respected infectious disease Professor Jay Bhattacharya of Stanford University in California, has called lockdowns the biggest public health mistake in history. Well, lockdowns were the worst investment in history too. 34 billion quid wasted on a test and trace scheme that was never going to stop a bug like this one, and the billions wasted on PPE, Nightingale hospitals, and the billions lost on dodgy bounce-back loans and other handouts that will never be repaid. Plenty of establishment broadcasters today are up in arms about the borrowing. They're so worried. Except that all of the main channels, and you know who I'm talking about, were the biggest cheerleaders of the ruinous COVID measures just a few short months ago. Some of us pointed out the appalling and needless economic damage that was happening at the time, but we were the bad people remember? I cautiously approve this budget because it's a rejection of the institutional pessimism that is now rooted within this country. We've become addicted to bad news and have indulged in the narrative that Britain is a basket case, or, as a national radio presenter recently said, close to being a failed state. Failed state? Do me a favour. Talking Britain down has become a pastime among the metropolitan elite. It will never happen on my watch. We now have a bold Prime Minister and a bold Chancellor that actually believe in this country and want to see it prosper. I wish them well. We all need them to succeed. If they're wrong, they will lose the next election. Fair enough. The greatest casualty of this budget is the creeping socialism which has turned us into a big spending, high taxation, low growth economy, which is crap for everyone, particularly for the poorest in our society. Don't forget, it was the drastic reduction in tax in the 80s under Margaret Thatcher and her incredible Chancellor Nigel Lawson that led to an economic boom and the extension of financial opportunity to everyone in our society. The top rate of tax was reduced from, wait for it, 83% in 1979 to 40% by 88. And the basic rate of income tax went from 33% to, again, 25% in 1988. What happened when they cut taxes? The economy skyrocketed. In the 80s, working class people started businesses, enjoyed an unprecedented disposable income, and were able to buy the council houses and flats in which they lived. And of course, unemployment was eradicated. The 80s were a decade of aspiration in which we grew Britain into what it will become today. Because for all of our current challenges, we are still the fifth biggest economy in the world, with the lowest unemployment in the G7, and we still enjoy an enviable rate at which to borrow. This government are right to go for growth, because a healthy, growing economy benefits everyone. A high national income allows us to have the great health service, the great police force, the great defence, the great schools and the great welfare support that we value so highly. And to be fair to New Labour, they understood that too. They kept taxes low and supported big earners in the late 90s and 2000s to increase their wealth. Why? Because it was in the national interest. They made their money, they spent their cash here, they paid their taxes. Tony Blair, for his sins, was aspirational too. And what happened? A decade of sustained growth. I do hope you'll forgive me for being nice about Tony Blair. I won't make a habit of it. Look, folks, we've got to wean ourselves off the crack cocaine of tax and spend, an addiction to which both Labour and more recently Tory governments have been guilty. This country's got lots of problems, we all know that. But by rolling the dice and taking a punt on the enterprise of the British people and putting money back in their pocket and attracting filthy rich people to live and spend their money and taxes here, Prime Minister Liz Truss and Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng have made it abundantly clear what their focus will be over the next 2 years. It's the economy, stupid. This mini-budget was big on ideas, and it's my prediction it will set Britain on a path to recovery, tapping into the opportunities that Brexit has to offer, and it may just seal the deal for Liz Truss at the next election. Even beer and wine will be spared the taxman's avaricious clutches. So let's hope this gamble pays off. Here's to growth, folks. I'll drink to that.